Quick question. Can your supervisors communicate, solve conflicts, lead with confidence? Anyone promoted from operations to management will tell you that the soft skills are the hard skills. That's why we created a program for technically minded folks to learn the right tools for today's leadership challenges. Tools like reading employee emotions, setting workplace goals, and communicating with a diverse workforce. Hungry for more? Get the details at shiftworkplace.co/supervisory leadership training. That's shiftworkplace.co/supervisory leadership training.
Hello, Culture and Leadership Connections podcast listeners. Marie Gervais here with my wonderful guest, Monique Allen, who is the CEO and Creative Director of the Garden Continuum, an award-winning 7-figure landscape, design, build, and fine gardening company located in Massachusetts, currently operating debt-free and profitable with 20 employees on staff. That is a fantastic accomplishment, and many companies who say that they're really doing well could not say that. But Monique can say it for sure. Monique is the founder of the Life-Scape method for landscape development and the author of the book, Stop Landscaping, Start Lifescaping. I have to get a copy, which outlines how to imagine and plan a regenerative landscape. She considers her primary job to be a gardener of people and is committed to nurturing a compassionate business culture that supports her mission to be an eco-friendly company with triple bottom line success. Monique, I'm going to be asking you what that means in a bit. She is an active business coach in the green industry space, specializing in working with business owners to grow their landscape business practices through the development of scalable systems and well-curated and nurtured teams. Monique, I can't tell you how happy I am to interview you. I'm just bubbling over with excitement. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Marie. I am so excited too. I could tell right away when I started to research your work that we are kindred spirits about culture building. So I am so excited.
That's great. Well, let's just jump right in, and you can tell the audience a bit about who you are and what you do from your own perspective outside of the bio.
Okay. Well, Maria, I'd like to start by just saying that, I think of myself as a work in progress, and I feel like it's really important to start with that because I've been doing landscape work for 36 years, and I've owned a business for most of that time, and I've been an employer for about 30 years. And, you think you got it, and then something new comes along, and you realize you're back in learning mode. And so I think it's really, really important, especially around something as fluid and deep as culture, to be a work in progress. So I come to with that mind. I'm a gardener first, and I turned into a designer, then turned entrepreneur, and then turned into a business coach. And I started in very conventional landscape development and care, and then little by little moved into conservation practice, environmental practice, and then into regenerative practice. And all of that is just kind of pulling on those threads that show up in the evolution of owning a business, but also in the evolution, I think, of any craft or any skill set, is that if you're open, it's going to evolve. And so my total happy place right now is that I am positioning myself as a positive disruptor to the conventional methods of the landscape industry practice, which is a trade practice. And as you probably know, and your listeners know, the trades can be a little rough and tumble, and the culture can be a bit abrasive. And so a huge part of, my calling myself a gardener of people is just understanding that there is a quality of tending required if you are going to develop and nurture culture so that you can actually do business. So that's me.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack. I have about a million questions. I'm just going to have to hone them down. But
Okay.
What grabbed me specifically was just your evolving understanding of the environment in which you are and operate and do business, and the natural environment, and how that has become in your mind and the way that you run things a really interconnected ecosystem. And I'm looking very much forward to hearing about how that works. When we were speaking earlier, you were telling me about a model that you have. Maybe you could just run that by in case I forget forget to ask you about it later.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So my book, Stop Landscaping, Start Life-Scaping, the point of writing the book was to codify my understanding of the dynamic connective tissue in any system. And when you want to build something, it's very important to understand how that something is connected on its own, organically. How is it connected? And in nature, that's the dynamic quality of nature is immense. And so it's impossible for any one person to know every single system thread. So by developing the Life-Scape method, I was able to look at something simple, not easy, but simple, like strategic, looking very tightly at landscape construction. So a good example would be you've bought a new home and you want to develop the outside space. Where do you start? At what point do you pick up a shovel? At what point do you do any specific task? The Life-Scape method helps you to back up so that you start with understanding the basics of a system, and then you work incrementally into the point of action, the actual construction piece, which is where most people want to start, which is why they waste a lot of money and have a lot of mistakes. And when I built the Life-Scape method, I did it organically in my company. When I wrote the book, I had to backtrack and I had to codify what I did, which was a huge learning experience for me. It's the first book I've written, so I had to learn that, but also had to untether my thinking. And then the model increased in the sense that I was very interested in triple bottom line thinking or the circular economy. And I wanted to make sure that part of the intrinsic value of what I do for work is such that I have positive impacts on the environment with a very, very strong leaning toward reducing climate change. And then I would also have a very strong impact positively on human beings. And then I'd be able to make money doing that. That was the method in Life-Scape.
Right. So the environment and the positive effect on the environment and working with the environment, and then people and working with people. And then out of that emerges profit.
Correct.
Okay. I did get that right then.
Yes.
Yeah. It's a wonderful model and it makes so much sense. I worked with a number of companies where I asked them, so what's your birth to death life cycle? And they go, what? We just make a product. And I go, yeah, well, who gets it before you do? And then where does it go when it dies? I don't know, but that's not responsible. That's not respecting the fact that we're part of an environment and we have to know this. Otherwise, why are we creating something that we don't know where it's going to land?
Correct. And I think the other piece of that is it really helps us to understand the fleeting nature of our impact as a single human being, but our enormous impact as a population. And tethering those two together is important. It helps take a little bit of your own personal self-importance out of the picture and realize that, we all have the ability to be legacy trainers and to leave legacies. And there's nothing more amazing in my mind than the simplicity of planting a tree very well, a well-chosen, well-sourced, well-planted, and well-cared for tree that would live generations after you. And you see those, and we all take an in-breath when we see that tree, right? So I feel like we can look at that and we can say, oh, okay, I've got to do that in my business. I have to do that in my family making. I have to do that in the broader ecosystem of my community interaction.
Everything comes back to trees.
It does.
Everything.
I'm with you.
We could go on this thread for a long time.
Yeah.
But I think I'm going to go to the second piece, which is, can you share a couple of incidents from your childhood that got you so excited about the environment and about landscaping? Are there some incidents that stand out for you and made you into that passionate life-scaping person that you are today?
So there's a couple of things there that I think are really important. So a story that I have is my mother's parents. They bought land in the Allegheny Mountains in the western panhandle of Maryland. And I don't know, maybe they had 100 acres or 75 acres or something, but my uncle still has this land today. And as kids, we went up there and we just played on this mountain. I remember being on the back of his tractor, driving down to the cistern to get water. There was no running water. It was, battery electricity. There were no flushing toilets. It was like you were just out there. And I remember that place as an incredible, happy place for me. And so for me, I think that was the point when I realized I had a cellular connection to nature. Beyond that, though, nobody taught me to garden. Neither of my parents taught me anything about landscaping. My father's an immigrant from the Middle East. And my mother was a young woman who ran off to Europe, and that's where she met my dad. And both my parents in some ways were kind of runaways of sorts. They like kind of ran away from their birth families. They wanted to live different. They were a bit eccentric, and neither was at all ready to parent. And so very interestingly, when I think about the way I nurture the planet, it has a lot to do with some early childhood trauma and lack of safety in home, and finding that when I felt the safest, it was when I was connected to the ground. So I felt really safe on my grandparents' property. And the first time I ever got paid to garden or landscape, I had my hands in the earth, and I had no idea what was going on. But I was 18 and it was regulating. And so I wanted more of it.
Yeah, I actually just did a session for my productivity tools about the regulating power of being in the forest, being near trees, and then also the bodies of water, because it's just, we really need that. We're very dysregulated because we're so away from nature most of the day.
Yes.
What countries did your parents come from?
My father was from Syria. He's Armenian. So his family was, part of the Armenian diaspora, kind of rescued from Armenia into Syria. And my mom's from Maryland, but she sort of ran away to Europe and was a linguistics major and studied French. And so my upbringing was, I definitely have a third culture mindset. I learned French and English simultaneously, and we lived in Paris. And my first real full spoken language was French. But Armenian was always kind of peppered in there. And so at a young age, I was speaking French, Armenian, and English in one sentence, which I didn't differentiate. I think I just latched onto the words that felt the most resonant. And when I came back to this country, my parents put me in a bilingual school. I think I was maybe 13 before I realized I wasn't French. I didn't even realize, that there was no French in me. I happened to speak the language and live there.
But but you grew up in France, right?
Just at a very young age. I was only there for probably about a year and a half, maybe. But it was a young, early language development. So that's where I developed language.
But you grew up in an Armenian French. Did your parents speak Armenian and French at home? They did, right?
They spoke French and English, but I lived in Watertown as a young person, and Watertown's a very big Armenian community in Massachusetts, and so there was Armenian all around me.
Yeah, so you had all of those cultural influences right from a young age.
Yeah.
Yeah, plus the American influence, which is just sort of all pervasive. That's where everybody's living there in that context.
Yeah.
Cool. Very cool. So that just led right into, groups. So the groups that you were born into, they must have influenced you significantly. Which ones stand out as being influences for your sense of culture and self as a leader right now?
Yeah. It's interesting because while I feel connected to the French language, my name is Monique. It doesn't feel like culturally like a strong influence. The strong influences for me, the Armenian influence is huge. I've always felt like an outsider Armenian because I never developed the language and always lamented and felt a bit left out. Wanted to know my Armenian-ness more. I was very lucky to be able to go to Lebanon and to Syria and to be with family. So that was really, really good. And I love Armenian food. It is like the total 100% comfort food for me.
Is it like a mixture of sort of, I'm really familiar with Iranian food and Arabic food. And then there's also the Eastern Europe influence. Is it kind of like a mixture of those things, or is it very specific?
There are some specific elements, but the Middle Eastern cuisine has a lot of blending. So where, you find the Armenian culture would call something by one name and the Arabic culture would call it by another name. But for all intents and purposes, my family was in an Arab country. So my father spoke Armenian in the house, Arabic in the street, French in school, and then learned English after that. So for them, there was this real bleed with the cultures. And I think one of the things that from a group perspective that it brought to me is that I didn't have any real discernment of difference. In other words, if I were to say one sentence, like a story my mother used to love to say is I'd say something like, look, bizdik mezone. And I'm saying, look at the little house, but I'm saying, look in English, little in Armenian, house in French, but with an Armenian ending.
Yeah, maisonnée.
Yeah, so I didn't discern difference. And I think one of the things that repeated over and over when I look back is that I loved being kind of an edge dweller in groups, so that I always had the ability to connect with the strays of the group or connect with the people that were in the group that also were in another group.
That made you the bridge builder.
Yes, exactly. And I loved that. And I never really wanted to be overly identified with any one group. I really wanted to embrace diversity.
Don't you think the third culture partially is a little bit of fear of being trapped in one spot? There's this bridging and there's this ability to look inwards and see the good, the bad, and everything in between in ways that people who only are feeling dead center in the middle can't see. But there's also a little bit of fear of not wanting to get stuck in any one spot. Or is that just me projecting that on you?
No, it's not you at all. I think it's quite real. So in addition to being a third culture individual, my parents, they were kind of messy from the start. And so by the time I hit high school, I think I had already been to like 12 or 13 schools. Okay. So I moved a lot. So I got real familiar with being the new kid.
Yeah.
And so when I finally didn't have to be moving all the time, I then moved myself every 2 years for 10 years,
I totally identify.
So I do think there may be explicit sort of indicators of fear, but also sort of more subtle, implicit, like if I stay still, what will happen? And I know
maybe just that the new is what's always the most familiar. Being in an unfamiliar situation is familiar, and being in a familiar situation gets a little bit like, I don't know if I should stay here.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think to speak to that, I think the thing that's really important about that is that the only way you really do get to the point of knowing yourself is you do actually have to get still. And so I had a lot of fear, I think, around getting still. And I've now been, married for 24 years. I've been living on the same piece of property for about that same amount of time. And I have now learned how we can evolve in place. Like we can actually have roots. You can be that amazing oak tree and have roots, but still be growing. And I don't think I learned that early on. I thought growth was movement.
That's really an interesting insight. And maybe growth is both movement and roots. So what about groups that you adopted? I mean, you obviously had to join the landscaping business group, but there must have been others you adopted or that you chose to belong to that influenced your sense of who you are. What would some of those groups be?
So first off, I joined a religious group growing up. So my childhood was, I had loving parents, but it was traumatic. And there was some upheaval and some aggression in there. And to try to figure it out, I think I must have been about 11 years old. And I met a girl in school who was a born again Christian and very effectively proselytized to me. My father's the Orthodox Christian and my mother is a Catholic, and they both ran away, right? So they had completely left and weren't going to raise us with any religion. I met this girl and her family kind of took me under their wing, and I ended up connected to the church, very connected until I was 18. So about 7 or 8 years. And I went to Bible camp. I went to Bible school. I decided to get baptized when I was, 14, and learning a faithful practice. I don't consider myself a practicing Christian now, but at that time it was so tethering and grounding. And it was another piece of the grounding that was really important. And now I just finished my 200-hour yoga teacher training, and I've been starting to study the sutras and really understand just a much broader thinking of universal energy and spirituality. And that's huge for me because it's hard to believe in nature and not believe in a force that's a little bit greater than, your gas pedal, if that makes any sense. So that I would say is a huge cultural impact on me.
All of creation is speaking of the creator. So you can't avoid that for very long or deny it because it makes no sense.
Yes.
I would see that. And religion is a moral compass grounder in the same way that working with the earth is a grounder or emotional regulation. And many people at this point are on a spiritual journey of discovery where they savor aspects of different religions, like your experience with Christianity, and then your experience really with Buddhism and Hinduism through yoga, although you may not have explained it exactly the same way. There are so many Buddhist practices in yoga. All of those are part of this prism of us understanding our existence, right, on multiple levels. So it's really interesting to hear you speak about how that works for you. In some of what we would call Western, although all religions are from the East, but what we would call Western religions, people have lost their sense of mysticism and the sacred. And I think that's what everybody's looking for in a lot of their exploration of Buddhist practices and natural sort of practices as well. I don't know if that resonates with you or not.
It does. And I think that when we can, first off, I have to say, I love that visual of a prism. That's brilliant. I love that.
It's your mountain, your childhood mountain. Everyone's coming up from a different side. And then when you look at it, you look down and you go, whoa, it's a prism. We never knew. Sorry, right. Keep going.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for that. I just jotted that down. I really like it. And I also love that you brought in the sacred, because I think that going back to this idea of the Life-Scape method, the Life-Scape method is actually asking us with more secular language to step back and respect the system. And I think that if you can even rise up a little bit from that platform, you actually enter into faith and you enter into the sacred. And I think when you are dealing with nature, you're not putting your hands on your hip and going out to nature and say, oh, really? Prove it. It just is. And there has to be some sense of that sacred reverence. And I think that when we practice that, no matter how anybody practices it, it helps us to, if you turn that perspective into business and into working with other human beings, I think it really helps to lead with a little bit more compassion and be able to develop empathy, because when you think of, each human being is somewhat sacred, you sort of quiet the judgmental voice. And so I love that through line that you just made between the prism and the sacred nature of our connectivity with nature and other human beings.
Well, I love the connection you just made with respect to system. And, when people say, oh, well, I'm a spiritual person, I don't really have any system, or I don't just trust systems. I think that's a lack of respect for the systems that have evolved. Not always the system that's currently in place, but there is a system everywhere. Everything that you look at is systematic. I mean, right from the looking to the molecules and smaller than that, and then moving outwards towards the solar systems that we're just discovering around us, even not, beyond our own solar system, that everything has a system. And first you have to see it, because you're experiencing it, but you don't know what you're like a fish in the water. The fish can't explain the system of the water that's around it, but it's in a system. If you notice it and you can say, okay, here's the system. And then you go, whoa, there's something there. I need to respect that. You may grow out of it or move beside it or through it or grow roots in it, but seeing the system is really important. I just never even thought of that until you said respect the system in that way.
Yeah. And when we go back to this idea of third culture, and then maybe there's this fear of being like locked in, right? So that's like fear of a system, right? Like, maybe I would get locked in. And I think that it's easy to trip into the idea that a system is rigid. And I don't know, maybe a computer program has to be super rigid because we're working in kind of binary action. But I think when we're working in systems of nature and in the system of culture, it's dynamic and it's evolutionary and it's complex. And because all that dynamism and complexity is in there, it's going to be really, really hard to make snap judgments or understand something, right off the bat. So if we learned to respect and then take a step back and respond as opposed to react, I think what happens is we're just elevating the sacred nature of systems as a whole and the allowance that we can say, okay, I don't get the water, but clearly there's something going on with the water, and have that be okay until you can get more information.
I really my mind's going crazy with all these things that you're saying. And the news yesterday, at least for the news that we heard, was that India's made laws banning interfaith marriage. And so if you have Hindus and Muslims and they see each other's systems and respect the systems, fall in love and marry, and those systems grow, how could that be a bad thing? And if your system on its own can't grow and communicate with other systems, it is going to die. And no ecosystem is independent of other ecosystems, right? So
right.
the more we keep saying, no, it's us over here and you over there, and don't cross the line, the more we're sealing the death of our culture.
What comes to my mind when you say this is there's a book, and I'm going to forget the name. It was an interview done by Bill Moyers with Joseph Campbell, The Power of Myth.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a book that my mother gave me when I was probably in my late teens or heading off to college. And it was awesome because Joseph Campbell was writing about myth and he was writing about religion. And he was talking about, you even said, everything started in the East. We call it West, but like if you really follow the threads, it goes back and back. So that's what Joseph Campbell did. And he was talking about the seeds of religion and, that move into systemic dogmas that end up with books that end up with clashing groups and so on. And he wrote the whole book using Star Wars as kind of his filter. And so a young person like me, I was able to read it. And the actual book that I got was illustrated on top of it. It was a big, almost like coffee table size book. And I remember that being so incredibly powerful because it would immediately discharge this idea that a Hindu and a Muslim couldn't marry. At the central core of both those books, of both those religions, of both those systems is the exact same thing.
Yeah, we're one, and
we're one.
And if we're all walking up to the top of the mountain, it's the same.
Right.
It's the same goal. And you wouldn't deny the other side of the mountain is non-existent or being not essential to your climb. If that other side of the mountain wasn't there, you wouldn't get anywhere.
Right.
So I'm sorry, I'm just always going down the rabbit trail with your great comments, but this respect the system piece is going to really stick with me. Okay. Let me just go back a little bit to the idea that, what aspects of the cultures. I would say you've taken all those pieces of different cultural experiences that you had where you're standing on the edge and you started to see all the systems. I'd say that's the influence. Is that on track?
Yeah, it's very on track. And I will tell you how I describe myself. It's like we all try really hard to find, like, what is our genius zone? What is that one place where we vibrate in a way that feels resonant, not only within us, but sort of resonant outside of us. And for me, it's that I have the ability to see divine order in chaos.
Yes.
And the idea is really to find the through line, the connective tissue between things that would otherwise seem opposite or disconnected. And I think that was an incredible offshoot of, a broken family, the tricultural influences, the multiple languages, the moving. I was an only child till I was 5, and then I had a brother. So, there was a shift there. And I think all of that, my survival mechanism was such that, okay, you have got to peak your attention to the broader ecosystem of your surroundings and then understand what's the through line, what's the connective, how do you get from point A to point B? And so I've just sort of brought that all the way through into business building.
This is great. So you were born with a temperament, and then your personality evolved through multiple other experiences. What would you say has made you as part of your temperament, and what have you grown into your personality?
I think I have a pretty easy temperament. I think I was a very easy baby. I was a very easy child. My parents treated me like an adult, I think, straight out of the womb. And I was talked to and taken about as though I was an equal. And then when my brother was born, I was very happily and quickly made into a caretaker. And then I would say that, I have a sort of a naturally positive mood and outlook. I always say the glass is full. It's not half empty or half full. It's half full of water and half full of air. It's full. And so that just comes very natural for me. Personality, I definitely see myself as expressive. I'm a real driver. I'm generally happy. But I think the other side of that coin is that I can be overly serious and really demanding of myself and of other people. And I think a personality trait that I've worked really hard on is I can be very edgy. And I think that came from the sort of abrasive upbringing where, I learned to raise my voice and to hit and to flip out and be, and so I had to unlearn that. So
yeah, I can identify with that too.
Can you? Yeah, that's a tough one to unlearn, but it's so powerful to unlearn it and to reconnect to the easy temperament. But that has been a couple of decades in the making.
Sometimes it jumps out to bite you though anyway.
Oh, yes, it does.
I was on this group call, not last night, the night before, I was on this group call with a group working on with, and this one woman who's from Russia and who adopted 2 children from Ethiopia who are now teenagers. And she said, so they're like seeing, everything around them as being racist, which of course it isn't. And I said, how do you know it isn't? Are you Black? And then I went, why did I say that? She said, well, that's why I wouldn't say anything, because people just jump up and attack me. And I thought, well, that was a really abrasive thing that I just said that would have completely made her feel like she was being attacked. But it just hit me that it was just so blatantly obvious that when you don't have the same skin color, you are not going to have the same experience. And I'm just like, what? How can you not see that? Are you Black? No? Okay.
Right. I call that the blurt. It's just, it's out, and then you're like, oh.
Yeah, but who gave me the right to jump in and say that to her at that point?
Right.
Nobody.
Right.
Nobody. So it was,
it's,
that was like, oh man, I thought Right. Okay, back to you. So I think that was a really nice explanation of your temperament, being easygoing, positive, nurturing, and then had that edginess was something that evolved, and then learning to mitigate that edge was what giving you the maturity and wisdom of your personality now. So can you think of a time, you've already mentioned quite a number of them, but can you think of a time when you became aware that your understanding of the world was just your culture and not, in fact, normal?
Yeah. I think I accepted that honestly, the word I used was weird. I just kind of labeled myself as weird early on. And so knew that my brain was going to hit most cultural norms on some odd angle. But the first time that the word culture kind of crossed my mind as a thing that you could have a conversation about that wasn't, I'm an Armenian or I'm French or, like that, especially when it came to work, was that I had an individual that I hired who was super smart, super capable, had all the skill sets that I needed. We even had similar desires about how we were going to do work in the landscape development field. And as hard as I tried, I could not, we were like oil and water. And she made me kind of crazy. She actually made me cry. I could not understand how to work with her. It felt like everything I did offended her. And I just didn't understand. And somebody actually straight up said to me, she's just not a cultural fit. You might just need to just call it a day. She's just not a cultural fit. And I'm like, what the heck is that? What is that? What does that mean?
Yeah, because people often use that as an excuse.
Yeah.
But it sounds like it really wasn't a cultural fit. You're right.
Well, it wasn't a cultural fit. And so this sent me on this long spiral of learning to get some clarity on what culture in the workplace was. And so if you have certain policies within a company and you need everybody to follow those policies may have to do with making sure the system is operating properly and that there's functionality, but it also may be to help support a culture. And some people want to come to work and talk about their weekend, and other people, they don't want you to know anything about their private lives. And so I thought that I would just have to bend to every person. And so I spent an enormous amount of the early years of my employment history bending to a lot of different people and then trying to soften the rough edges between people. And I got to the point where I was like, this is exhausting. This is my company. This is what I believe in. This is my mission. These are my values. If y'all want to come work with me because you have an alignment within those values, come on board. If you don't, there's the door. It's totally okay.
It's my company and I'm paying for it and I'm paying you.
Right. But it took me so long to embrace that as a good thing. I thought I was being selfish or whiny or controlling or type A or whatever you wanted to label it. And I felt like I got labeled everything.
When in fact, you were just working against your own system when you thought that way.
Yes. And so ultimately, she and I parted ways and I learned to hire in a different way. And one of my hiring questions for years, I don't use this one now, was on a scale of 1 to 10, how weird are you? With the definition of weird being the creative brilliance that is you. Where do you put yourself? How well do you fit in the box? Are you the one always trying to jump out of the box? Or are you the one running to the middle of the box? And the importance of asking that question was getting people to self-identify and getting them to understand that as a culture, I was actually looking for edge dwellers. I was looking for people who had some ability, even if they maybe didn't have it as developed as mine, to on some way, shape, or form deal with diversity in people, diversity in land, diversity in ecosystems, because that was going to make the most resilient workforce. And that's what I was looking for.
Yeah, but you also want people who are going to work towards the unity of vision that is the brand of the company. You want them to contribute from their full diverse selves, but you don't want them to be working against the vision.
Correct. The vision being around regenerative landscape and the Life-Scape method.
Yeah.
And I have such a strong stance on health and wellness for the human system, that one of the things I did is we are a substance-free company. So this company, there's no smoking in my company. And that was a very difficult thing, because it's not that I can't hire smokers, because that wouldn't be possible. But I had to create, and I'm lucky I live in the state of Massachusetts where you can't smoke in public places. So our work is a public place. Our trucks are a public place. Our clients' homes are private property, and they are signing on with us for that health strategy. So what happens is something as simple as that begins to create a cultural through line of health and wellness that is not only about the planet and the soil and the plants, but also the people who work and interact with those environments, if that makes sense.
It sounds like in your description of your realization that there was a cultural shift required, that you realized that you can work with certain people and other people you can't work with, and that you can't just work with everybody and bend to everybody, that you have to have a structure within which others need to participate. And yet you want those participants to be dynamic. You don't want them to be clones.
Right. You're not looking for a static system. You want a dynamic system, but the system has to have a mission. This system is very, very clearly bounded by a tight mission. I mean, the founder of the company wrote a book on a method, and we do that, right? So it's like, I don't know if I could be any clearer. So if somebody doesn't, and I've had this, so I had an employee that was elevating into a relatively high position and realized that he did not believe in the soil regenerative work that we were doing. And so was basically skipping doing that work on the projects. And so I was charging for it, but he wanted to skip it. And, I had to just lay down the hammer and say, it's okay for you not to believe in it. That's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with you. You don't have to believe what I believe, but if you work here, you have to. So
if you work here, you have to do it, and you have to do it fully, consciously, and in an engaged way.
Yes.
Whether you like it or not, it's the power of unity. So you're saying, I may personally disagree with this, but I am going to do what is required for the whole. I'm going to do that because that's what's going to help us move forward. And if there's any mistake in it or a problem, it will become obvious. But if you're always bucking it, nothing happens.
Yes. And I think the other little piece of that, which is so great, is that helps you as an owner, but also as an individual to determine whether you're on the right path or not. So at every turn of training and reviewing and kind of CEO powwows with my employees, I always talk to them about future casting. Like, you have to future cast. You have to look at, where am I now? Where would I like to be in kind of that near-term future? And where would I like to be in the midterm future? So if I was doing exactly the same thing that I'm doing right now in 1 year, would I be satisfied? And I think that's such a powerful question, because it makes them realize that if they're not happy now and they do nothing, they will have the same feeling in a year. Mm-hmm. And so doing something, or 10, or 10, because those years add up. But that line of questioning, if they don't feel like they have an alignment or resonance with the mission and the values of the company, they are invited with incredible respect and reverence to leave. Mm-hmm. That's okay. They can say, it's just not resonating with me anymore. And as an employer, I'm not going to be mad at you. I'm going to shake your hand. I'm going to help you find your next place.
Mm-hmm. Because it may just be that they're driven to do something different. So that's a really great response to that question. And we're pretty much at the end of the interview. I'm just wondering if you had tips, and it seems like it's been coming out already through the interview, but when you're hiring someone, or when somebody is hiring you, what kinds of things are important in being able to work most effectively with you, with Monique?
So with me, I know that I've cut a lot of planets in Virgo. So I like organization, I like communication, I like data. And so I'm actually working on hiring a PA right now. And in hiring her, I have 3 people helping me with this hire so that they can talk to whoever this PA might be in the interview process about who I am and what they would need to bring to the table. They say that, you can't give somebody your values. So looking for that value alignment is really huge. I like details. I like a timeline. I like a deadline. Be clear with me. Vagaries kind of make me crazy. And so I like that. And that is a way that I feel tethered. I feel moored and rooted in the practical purpose of what I'm doing. And I do not like anything micromanaging. So I actually even separated my office from the general office of my company because I want my staff to be able to work autonomously as much as they possibly can. So that's been huge, that trust culture, building basic trust in the very beginning. That happens when you have real strength and alignment in your values. So if you're going to an interview or you're trying to build your team, get clear on your values. Get clear on what I would call the deal breaker that you won't accept. Like a deal breaker for me is I cannot work with somebody who's a heavy smoker and I can't do it. It's a deal breaker. And it's probably because of my own growing up in that household. And so that's probably like a kind of a silly thing, but it's easy. It's tangible.
It's a good example. And it's good because it is tangible, because it points to other things too, because it's about health. It's about sustainability. It's about not doing something that will negatively affect the environment for other people. And so it actually speaks to quite a few of your values to do that. Mm-hmm. And that was a really thoughtful answer. I appreciate that. Anything you'd like to say, promote, shout out to the audience? This is your soapbox moment.
Yeah. Well, so my big shout out is the book, Stop Landscaping, Start Life-Scaping. It's definitely a little tongue in cheek because clearly I am landscaping on a daily basis, but looking at that more reverent system thinking of life-scaping. We can life-scape our land. We can life-scape our businesses. We can life-scape our relationships. And I really think that more of us need to be regulating in nature. So just love to share the book with as many people who want to bring it into their lives. And my website is, I do have a shop on the website. It's thegardencontinuum.com. Mm-hmm. And you can buy the book there. You can buy it autographed or go to like IndieBound or something. And then I have oodles of free content. Tons. So I have two blogs. One is a gardening blog and one is a business blog. So that's free. And then lots of free ebooks. So if somebody just really wants to get their first little taste of planting, I have a great ebook called Picking Plants. And as I mentioned before, I am an active business coach for green industry professionals. So I help small business green industry owners, so landscape companies, figure out that next growth move where they can really figure out how to create their systems so that they can scale their companies to the next level. And so there's a lot on my website about that.
I have a lot to learn from you, Monique. And I'm looking forward to diving in. So lovely to have this time and for you to dedicate this big chunk of your being to our podcast. Thank you so much, Monique.
Well, you're very welcome. This was really wonderful. I loved the little rabbit holes and offshoots that you went down because we are definitely kindred spirits in a lot of these topics. And it's really encouraging to have a podcast like yours and to listen to all of your wonderful guests talk about these cultural elements. I think it's a great conversation. So thanks for including me.
Thank you, Monique. And everyone, it's Monique Allen with the Garden Continuum. Look her up. I'm going to be doing that in a lot more detail. So I hope you can join me on that journey. Thanks, Monique.
Thank you.
I love Monique Allen's combination of business acumen with deep concern about the environment in a successful enterprise that does not compromise values for profit. Her ability to develop sustainable landscaping processes while building a 7-figure business is reflected in the way she works with her staff and develops her team. Using the metaphor of a gardener of people, Monique brings wholeness and purpose to industry by uniting nature and people in a loving, mutually beneficial relationship. Want to learn how to be eco-friendly and successful, to respect and appreciate nature? Monique Allen is your go-to expert. It was an honor to interview her, and I hope you enjoyed listening to her insightful answers as much as I did. Thank you for listening, and may culture and leadership connections continue to guide and inspire your day. This podcast would not be possible without the expertise of our Culture and Leadership Connections production team. A big thank you and shout out to Mike Kurlander for audio production and editing, to Malvika Kathpal for the show notes, Bernadette Guadiz for online web and social media management and promotions, Celine Bayogo for design, and Kirsten Hoyer for website and branding. Thank you so much. Are you a big Culture and Leadership Connections podcast fan? Our Patreon platform is the most versatile way to hear podcast episodes, cross-cutting theme discussions, and watch VIP podcast guest videos. You can download the app to your phone and listen wherever you are. Check out the subscription levels for perks that appeal to you. Feel good about helping us cover podcast production costs while enhancing your listening experience at the same time. Go to patreon.com/Culture and Leadership Connections. That's spelled PATREON.com/Culture and Leadership Connections.